Meryl Streep steps out of her town car onto the glistening sidewalk of Fifth Avenue. Her simple navy blazer and jeans, a stark contrast to the opulence of Le Ciel, Manhattan's most celebrated French restaurant. Despite her understated attire, heads turn immediately. Three-time Academy Award winner Meryl Streep isn't someone you can miss, even in New York. The restaurant's facade gleams with polished brass and crystal-clear windows that reveal chandeliers casting prismatic patterns across white tablecloths. But Meryl's attention is drawn elsewhere. Through the immaculate windows, past the champagne flutes and imported flowers, she notices a teenage girl standing across the street. The girl, no more than 15, wears a jacket too thin for the October chill, clutching a tattered sketchbook to her chest. What catches Meryl's eye isn't just the girl's worn clothing, but the intensity of her gaze as she studies the restaurant patrons, occasionally making quick strokes in her notebook. "Ms. Streep, welcome to Le Ciel," the maitre d' greets her with practiced elegance. "Your table is ready." Meryl smiles politely, but her eyes drift back to the girl. "Has she been out there long?" she asks. The maitre d's smile falters. "Just one of the local characters," he says dismissively. "Please follow me." As Meryl is escorted through the dining room, she notices how the girl repositions herself whenever a server approaches the window, shrinking back as though trying to become invisible. The restaurant buzzes with the gentle hum of expensive conversations and the delicate clink of fine china, but Meryl's attention keeps returning to the window. Her table offers the perfect view of both the dining room and the street outside. The teenager has begun sketching again, her fingers red from the cold as they move across the page with surprising grace. Vincent, a waiter with silver-streaked hair and a posture as stiff as his pressed shirt, approaches Meryl's table. "Good evening, Mrs. Streep," he says, his French accent precise and cultivated. "May I tell you about our specials this evening? The chef has prepared an exceptional coq au vin with truffles from—" "The girl outside," Meryl interrupts gently. "Does she come here often?" Vincent's pleasant expression freezes. His eyes dart to the window and back, his mouth tightening almost imperceptibly. "I wouldn't know, madam. Now, about our wine selection. I'd like to order something for her," Meryl says, her voice kind but firm. "Something substantial and warm." The waiter's professional veneer cracks slightly. "I beg your pardon?" The girl outside. "I'd like to order a meal for her and perhaps a hot chocolate." Vincent straightens, his nostrils flaring slightly. "Miss Streep," he begins, lowering his voice to a whisper that somehow manages to convey both condescension and feigned concern. "Le Ciel isn't in the business of street charity. Perhaps you could direct her to a more suitable establishment. There's a diner 3 blocks down that might be more appropriate for her situation." Meryl's expression doesn't change, but something shifts in her eyes. "I'm not asking for charity, Vincent," she says, reading his name tag. "I'm asking to purchase a meal from this restaurant for another person. Isn't that what restaurants do? Provide food in exchange for payment?" Outside, a suited businessman approaches the restaurant entrance and scowls at the girl, making a sharp shooing motion with his hand. The girl quickly steps back, clutching her sketchbook tighter as she retreats to a greater distance, but doesn't leave entirely. "Our policy regarding takeout is quite strict," Vincent replies, his voice tightening. "We're not equipped for such requests, especially during our dinner service." Meryl calmly places her menu on the table. "Then I'll have her join me." Vincent's composed facade slips completely. "That would be impossible." The words escape before he can moderate his tone. Several nearby diners glance over. Realizing his error, Vincent leans closer, his voice a controlled hiss. "Mrs. Streep, we have a certain clientele to maintain. People come to Le Ciel for an experience of refinement and exclusivity." "And I came for dinner," Meryl responds mildly. "As did she. I imagine, though only one of us can afford it." A young server approaches with water but stops uncertainly, sensing the tension. Vincent waves her away with a sharp gesture. "Perhaps I haven't made myself clear," Vincent says, his accent thickening with irritation. "We don't serve that kind. Here?" The temperature in the room seems to drop several degrees. Meryl's smile doesn't waver, but her eyes harden like diamonds. "That kind," she repeats softly. The restaurant has grown quieter, conversations tapering off as diners become aware of the brewing confrontation. Vincent realizes too late that he's misstepped badly. He attempts to recover. "I simply meant—" "I understood exactly what you meant," Meryl interrupts, her voice carrying just enough to be heard at nearby tables. "What I don't understand is how someone's worth is determined by their clothing or financial situation." Outside, the girl has noticed the attention focused on her through the window. She begins to back away, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. "Wait," Meryl calls, though the girl can't hear her through the glass. She turns back to Vincent. "I'd like to speak with the manager, please." Vincent's jaw clenches. "Ms. Streep, I assure you I am fully authorized to handle all dining situations. Perhaps we could discuss this privately." "There's nothing to discuss," Meryl responds, standing. "I'm going to invite that young lady to join me for dinner. If that violates your policy of exclusivity, I'll happily take my business elsewhere, and let my friends know why." The implicit threat hangs in the air. Vincent's eyes darken with anger, poorly disguised as professional concern. "As you wish," he says coldly. "Though I must advise you that you may not find the experience pleasant. Some people simply don't belong in certain environments." What happens next not only changes this young girl's life forever, but teaches everyone present an unforgettable lesson about kindness, especially when an unexpected ally arrives to support Meryl's cause. Before we continue this touching story, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. If you enjoy stories of kindness and justice like this one, subscribe to our channel. Tomorrow at 12:30 p.m., we have another special story that will warm your heart. Le Ciel stands as a monument to culinary exclusivity in the heart of Manhattan, its azure facade and gold-leafed signage gleaming under custom Italian lighting. Inside, the restaurant is a cathedral to luxury. Hand-painted ceiling murals depict scenes from French aristocratic life, while imported marble floors reflect the warm glow of crystal chandeliers, each worth more than most people's yearly salary. The air carries the delicate perfume of rare white truffles and aged cognac. For 20 years, Vincent Rousseau has been the gatekeeper of this realm. His immaculately pressed suits and precision-trimmed silver hair match Le Ciel's obsessive attention to detail. Standing near the kitchen entrance, he watches Meryl Streep with narrowed eyes, his jaw tight with displeasure. 20 years, he mutters to himself. 20 years of maintaining standards. Vincent remembers when he first arrived in America from Lyon, penniless but determined. He had worked his way up from bussing tables at diners to becoming head waiter at New York's most exclusive establishment. Le Ciel isn't just a restaurant to him. It's validation of his worth, proof that he belongs among the elite he serves. "Is there a problem, Vincent?" The voice belongs to Chef Isabella Moreau, who has emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands. On her apron, despite her prestigious position, Isabella lacks the affectation that characterizes much of the staff. "Ms. Streep is causing a situation," Vincent replies, his accent thickening with agitation. "She wants to invite some street urchin to dine with her. Can you imagine? The girl looks like she hasn't seen soap in days." Isabella glances toward Meryl's table, then to the girl outside. "And this concerns you because—" Vincent's eyes widen. "Standards, Isabella. We have a reputation. Remember last month when that tech billionaire wanted to bring in his dog? We refused because we have standards." "A dog is not a human being," Isabella responds coolly. "Principles are principles," Vincent insists. "What next? Will we start inviting the homeless to use our bathrooms? Will our sommelier begin pouring $2 chuck? Where does it end?" From his vantage point, Vincent recalls a humiliation from his past. Being turned away from a fine restaurant in Paris when he was young, the maitre d' sneering at his cheap suit and provincial accent. "Not your place, boy," the man had said. The memory still burns, but rather than creating empathy, it hardened into a determination that he would never be on the wrong side of exclusivity again. "You're making a mistake," Isabella warns, but Vincent has already turned away, approaching Meryl's table with practiced smoothness. "Ms. Streep," he begins, "I've consulted with management. Unfortunately, we cannot accommodate outside guests without reservations. It's a liability issue." The lie rolls easily off his tongue. Meryl smiles thinly. Then make a reservation for her. Vincent's pulse quickens with annoyance. Our reservation book is completely full. I see an empty table right there, Meryl points. Out. That's reserved for Congressman Mitchell arriving shortly. Then she'll join me at my table. Vincent grips his serving tray tighter. Health department regulations require all patrons to meet certain hygiene standards. Across the room, whispers ripple among the diners. Vincent notices Mr. Kessler, a regular who tips generously, nodding in approval at his gatekeeping. But the Hendersons, another wealthy couple, exchange disapproving glances. Outside, the young girl has begun to walk away, shoulders slumped. She stops to look back once, and Vincent feels a fleeting moment of shame before squashing it. This is his domain, and he will protect it. Perhaps I haven't been clear, Meryl says, her voice still pleasant but with steel underneath. I'm not asking for permission. I'm going to invite her in, and we will both be dining here tonight. Then I'm afraid I must ask for your table. Vincent responds, feeling emboldened by Mr. Kessler's approving gaze. We have others waiting who better appreciate our establishment's ambience. A flash of genuine anger crosses Meryl's face, not the practiced emotion of her award-winning performances, but something authentic and fierce. Do you have any idea how entitled you sound right now? Vincent stiffens. Entitled? I've worked. For everything I have, I wasn't born into privilege. Neither was I, Meryl responds, which is exactly why I don't look at someone struggling and think they're beneath me. Vincent feels his professional mask slipping. You have no idea what it takes to maintain a place like this. We can't just open our doors to every what? Meryl challenges. Every charity case, Vincent finishes, his voice sharp. We are not a soup kitchen, Ms. Streep. The dining room has grown uncomfortably quiet. Even the pianist has paused, the last note hanging in the air like an unfinished thought. No one is asking you to be a soup kitchen, comes a new voice, deep and assured. Vincent turns to find himself face to face with Stanley Tucci, Meryl's longtime friend and colleague. The actor is impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, his signature, glasses framing eyes that currently hold no warmth. Stanley. Meryl greets him with visible relief. Perfect timing. Vincent feels a bead of sweat forming at his temple. One celebrity he could manage. But two, and Stanley Tucci, known food enthusiast with a popular culinary series and considerable influence in New York's restaurant scene. What seems to be the problem? Stanley asks, though his tone suggests he's already assessed the situation. No problem at all, Vincent attempts, his confidence wavering. Just explaining some of our policies to Ms. Streep. Are your policy being that certain people don't deserve to eat here? Stanley's question is delivered with deceptive mildness. Vincent scrambles to regain control. Mr. Tucci, please understand. Le Ciel has a responsibility to all our patrons to maintain a certain atmosphere. Yes, I've heard about your atmosphere, Stanley interrupts. In fact, I was just discussing Le Ciel with Jean-Michel from the Michelin Guide Committee yesterday. Fascinating conversation. The color drains from Vincent's face. The restaurant's 3 Michelin stars are its crown jewels. Even a hint that they might be reconsidered would send the owner into a panic. Outside, the girl has almost disappeared from view, her thin figure retreating down the sidewalk. Meryl stands abruptly. I've had enough of this, she declares. I'm going to invite her in myself. What happens next stuns everyone in the restaurant, especially when the owner herself makes an unexpected appearance that changes everything. Vincent's perfectly constructed world is about to collapse, and with it, his understanding of what true class really means. Emma Reeves clutches her sketchbook tighter as she walks away from Le Ciel, the cold October wind biting through her thin jacket. At 15, she's already experienced enough rejection to know when she's unwanted. The waiter's disdainful glances through the window made that perfectly clear. Still, she can't help looking back one last time. Through the gleaming windows, she catches a glimpse of the woman who had been watching her, Meryl Streep, her grandmother's favorite actress. For a moment, Emma thought the woman actually cared, but that was foolish. People like that lived in different worlds. Emma has been coming to this street for weeks, drawing the patrons of upscale restaurants. Her art teacher had encouraged her to capture humanity in its natural settings, and the contrast between wealth and her own circumstances provided plenty of inspiration. Her latest sketch shows diners floating in bubbles of light, separated from the darkness outside by invisible barriers. Not invisible, Emma whispers to herself, just glass. 3 months ago, her mother had died after a long illness, leaving Emma with her grandmother, whose arthritis made it difficult to continue her work as a seamstress. The small apartment they shared in Queens felt emptier each day, and Emma's sketchbook became her only escape. Inside Le Ciel, Zoe Torres, a young server, watches the unfolding drama from behind a service pillar. At 22, she's the newest hire, still on probation and unable to risk open defiance of Vincent. But something about the girl outside reminds her of her own younger sister. "This is ridiculous," she mutters to Paolo, a busboy. "Vincent's always been like this," Paolo replies with a shrug. "Last month he made a woman cry because her purse didn't match her shoes." Zoe's attention shifts to the kitchen, where Chef Isabella is plating a dish with meticulous precision. Unlike Vincent, Isabella had treated Zoe with respect from day one, even asking about her community college classes. Making a decision, Zoe slips into the kitchen. "Chef," she whispers urgently, "there's a situation with Miss Streep and Vincent." Isabella looks up, her knife pausing mid-slice. "Let me guess. The girl outside?" Zoe nods. "Vincent's refusing to let her in, and now Mr. Tucci is involved." A smile spreads across Isabella's face. "Perfect." "Perfect?" Zoe asks, confused. "Vincent needs this lesson," Isabella explains, her French accent softening. "And so does Le Ciel." She hands Zoe a plate. "Take this to table 7, then meet me in the walk-in freezer." Meanwhile, Stanley Tucci places a gentle hand on Meryl's shoulder. "Let me handle this," he murmurs. "Stanley," Meryl responds quietly, "that girl is leaving. Not for long." Stanley turns to Vincent, whose professional demeanor has begun to crack visibly under pressure. "You know, Vincent, restaurants aren't just about food, they're about hospitality. The word hospitality comes from the Latin hospes, meaning both host and guest." Vincent shifts uncomfortably. "Mr. Tucci, with all respect to your culinary, I knowledge—" "I'm not finished," Stanley interrupts politely but firmly. "The essence of hospitality is generosity toward strangers. It dates back to ancient times, when refusing shelter or food to travelers was considered not just rude, but sacrilegious. Around them, diners are watching with undisguised interest." An older woman at a nearby table nods in approval at Stanley's words, while a younger couple whispers excitedly, recognizing both celebrities. "This isn't ancient times," Vincent responds stiffly. "We have standards." "Yes, your precious standards," Meryl interjects. "Tell me, does treating people with basic dignity violate those standards?" Vincent's nostrils flare. "Miss Streep, you don't understand what it takes to maintain—" "I understand perfectly," Meryl cuts him off. "You believe exclusivity equals quality. It doesn't." At that moment, the restaurant's doors open, and Emma feels a gentle tap on her shoulder. She turns to find a young woman in a Le Ciel server's uniform. "Excuse me," Zoe says breathlessly, having run to catch up with her. "Would you please come back? There's someone who would like to meet you." Emma clutches her sketchbook protectively. "Is this some kind of joke?" Zoe shakes her head. "No joke. Meryl Streep asked for you specifically." Emma's eyes widen. "Why would she—" "Just come," Zoe encourages. "Chef Isabella is preparing something special." Back inside, Vincent watches in horror as Madame Claudette Laurent, the restaurant's owner, emerges from her private office. At 65, Claudette maintains the elegance and authority that helped her build Le Ciel into a culinary landmark. Her silver hair is swept into an immaculate chignon, her black dress simple but exquisitely tailored. "What is happening in my restaurant?" she asks, her voice carrying across the room without being raised. Vincent straightens immediately. "Madame, Laurent, I was just explaining our policy regarding appropriate guests to two of the most respected individuals in American cinema." Claudette finishes for him, her French accent pronounced but refined. I could hear the commotion from my office. Vincent relaxes slightly, confident in his employer's backing. "Yes, I was maintaining our standards. Your standards or mine, Vincent? Claudette asks sharply. The question catches Vincent off guard. They're the same, of course. Claudette turns to Meryl and Stanley with a warm smile. Miss Streep, Mr. Tucci, I apologize for any misunderstanding. Le Ciel prides itself on welcoming those who appreciate fine cuisine and art. She pauses meaningfully. All forms of art. Vincent's confusion is evident. Before he can speak, the front doors open again. Zoe enters, guiding Emma, who looks terrified but determined. Ah, Claudette says, and this must be our young artist. Emma freezes, uncertain how Claudette knows about her sketching. I've watched you from my office window, Claudette explains as if reading Emma's thoughts. Your dedication to your craft is admirable. Stanley steps forward, extending his hand to Emma. I'm Stanley. That's Meryl. We'd be honored if you'd join us. Emma looks between them in disbelief. I can't afford. So you're our guest, Meryl says firmly, with a pointed look at Vincent. At that moment, Chef Isabella emerges from the kitchen carrying a plate covered with a silver dome. The special is ready, she announces, winking at Emma. Vincent stands paralyzed, his world shifting beneath him. How had he so completely misread the situation? More importantly, how had he misread Madame Laurent? As Emma is led to Meryl's table, her sketchbook tucked safely under her arm, the restaurant buzzes with excitement. What began as a confrontation has transformed into something unexpected, a breaking of barriers that no one, least of all Vincent, had anticipated. What happens next reveals shocking truths about Madame Laurent's past that will change Vincent's perspective forever and give Emma an opportunity beyond her wildest dreams. Emma sits at Meryl's table, her worn sneakers barely touching the plush carpet. Her sketchbook rests on her lap, a shield between her and this unfamiliar world. Crystal glitters under the chandeliers, and conversations buzz around them in hushed, expensive tones. Stanley Tucci pulls out a chair with an encouraging smile. I shouldn't be here, Emma whispers to Meryl. Why not? Meryl asks simply. Emma gestures vaguely at herself, her faded jeans, her second-hand jacket. I don't belong. Belonging isn't about what you wear, Meryl says, her voice gentle but firm. It's about being human. And last I checked, that's something we all have in common. Vincent hovers nearby, his body language tense as he watches the scene unfold. His world is unraveling. Madame Laurent's unexpected support of this intrusion has thrown him off balance. 20 years of certainty about his place in the hierarchy suddenly feels precarious. Vincent, Madame Laurent calls, beckoning him closer. A word. Approaching warily, Vincent straightens his already impeccable posture. Yes, madam. Do you know why I hired you? She asks, her voice low enough that only he can hear. Vincent blinks. My experience, my standards. I hired you because you understood. Service? She corrects him. There was a time when you saw it as an honor to provide for others, not as a way to deny them. The words land like a physical blow. Before Vincent can respond, Madame Laurent turns away, approaching Meryl's table, with practiced grace. Miss Streep, Mr. Tucci, she greets them. I hope you'll allow me to join you briefly. She pulls out a chair without waiting for a response. And you must be Emma. Emma nods, her eyes wide. I've seen your work from my office window. Madame, Laurent continues, you have a remarkable eye for detail. You watched me drawing? Emma asks, stunned. Art speaks to me, Madame Laurent says simply, regardless of where it's created. Vincent steps forward, unable to contain himself. Madame, Laurent, while I respect your authority, I must express concern about the precedent we're setting. If word gets out that anyone can simply walk in, anyone, Meryl interrupts, her voice sharp. She's a child, Vincent, a talented one. That's not the point, Vincent insists, his accent thickening with emotion. Le Ciel represents excellence, exclusivity. At what cost? Stanley asks quietly. The restaurant has fallen silent, every diner now openly watching the confrontation. Even the kitchen staff has emerged, Chef Isabella standing with arms crossed near the swinging doors, Zoe beside her. Perhaps, Madame Laurent suggests, we should ask Emma what she thinks excellence means. All eyes turn to the teenager, who looks startled at being addressed. I don't know about restaurants, she stammers, but in art, excellence isn't about being exclusive. It's about expressing truth. And what truth do you express in your drawings? Meryl asks gently. Emma hesitates, then slowly opens her sketchbook. I draw what I see. People separated by glass. Those inside don't notice those outside. Sometimes they look right through them. She turns the book to reveal a striking sketch. Lou. Seal's diners captured in elegant lines, while outside figures stand like ghosts, transparent and unseen. The technical skill is undeniable, but it's the emotional impact that causes several diners to shift uncomfortably in their seats. Remarkable, Stanley breathes, genuinely impressed. Vincent stares at the drawing, something uncomfortable stirring in his chest. The technique is admirable, he admits reluctantly. It's more than technique, Meryl says. It's perspective. Emma turns another page, revealing a portrait of Vincent himself, captured earlier that evening. In Emma's rendering, he stands, tall and immaculate, but his eyes hold a sadness that Vincent himself hadn't realized was visible. This isn't about a free meal, Meryl continues, addressing Vincent directly. It's about seeing people as people, not as decorations for your restaurant or disturbances to your order. You don't understand, Vincent says, his voice suddenly weary. Standards protect us. They give us structure. From what? Stanley challenges. From whom? From chaos, Vincent insists. From judgment. An older diner rises from a nearby table, approaching with measured steps. His tailored suit and confident bearing mark him as one of Le Ciel's regulars. I've been coming here for 15 years, he announces, and I must say I agree with Vincent. Vincent straightens, vindicated. Standards are essential, the man continues. But Vincent has confused standards with barriers. He turns to Emma with unexpected gentleness. Young lady, your work shows more understanding of humanity than this restaurant has demonstrated tonight. Vincent's face flushes with anger and embarrassment. Mr. Whitman, you cannot possibly— I can and I do, Mr. Whitman interrupts. I didn't build my company by shutting doors. I built it by opening them. This isn't a business decision, Vincent argues. It's about tradition. Traditions change, Madame Laurent says firmly, or they die. Vincent's control finally breaks. You're all being sentimental. This girl's circumstances are unfortunate, but Le Ciel isn't a charity. We are a temple to— Fine dining to excellence? No, Meryl interrupts, standing. You've made it a fortress against humanity. That's not excellence, it's fear. The word hangs in the air. Fear. Vincent opens his mouth to protest, but no words come. I was afraid once, Emma says quietly, surprising everyone. After my mum died, I was afraid of everything changing. But my grandmother told me something I'll never forget. She looks directly at Vincent. She said, "Fear makes the wolf bigger than he is." The simplicity and wisdom of the statement silences the room. Even Vincent seems to deflate slightly. Meryl places a hand on Emma's shoulder. Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman. Chef Isabella steps forward. The food is getting cold, she announces practically. Perhaps we could continue this conversation over dinner. An excellent suggestion, Madame Laurent agrees, signaling to the staff. As plates are brought to the table, she says something quietly to Vincent, who nods stiffly before walking toward the kitchen, his shoulders rigid. What Vincent doesn't realize is that his world is about to be turned upside down by a revelation about Madame Laurent's past that will challenge everything he believes about class, worth, and belonging. Vincent stands in Le Ciel's immaculate kitchen, his hands gripping the stainless steel counter until his knuckles turn white. The bustling staff move around him like water around a stone, preparing dishes with practiced precision. But Vincent sees none of it, lost in the turbulence of his thoughts. 20 years of certainty, shaken in a single evening. You look like— You could use this, Chef Isabella says, sliding a small glass of cognac toward him. Vincent accepts it wordlessly, taking a measured sip. The familiar burn does nothing to calm the unfamiliar doubt growing inside him. I don't understand, he finally says. Madame Laurent has always valued exclusivity above all else. Isabella wipes her hands on her apron. Are you sure about that? Or is that what you wanted to believe? Before Vincent can respond, the kitchen doors swing open. Madame Laurent enters, her expression unreadable. "Walk with me, Vincent," she says, not a request but a command. She leads him through a narrow corridor to her private office, a space few staff members have ever entered. Unlike the opulent dining room, the office is surprisingly modest. Family photos line the walls and a worn leather chair sits behind an antique desk. "Sit," Madame Laurent instructs, taking her own seat. Vincent perches on the edge of a chair, discomfort radiating from every line of his body. "Do you know how I started Le Ciel?" she asks. "You purchased it from the previous owner in 1989, Vincent answers promptly. "You transformed it from a failing bistro into Manhattan's premier French restaurant." Madame Laurent smiles slightly. "That's the official story, yes." She opens a drawer, removing a faded photograph. "This is me, 1965, newly arrived in New York." Vincent studies the image with surprise. A young Claudette stands on a street corner, thin to the point of gauntness. Her clothes threadbare but clean. "I came with nothing," she continues. 17 years old, speaking broken English, with $10 sewn into my coat lining. Vincent's brow furrows. This doesn't align with the biography he's read in countless restaurant reviews, the story of a wealthy Parisian who brought her sophisticated palate to America. "For 2 years I slept on a cot in a kitchen where I washed dishes," Madame Laurent says. 14 hours a day, 6 days a week. "But your family in Paris," Vincent begins, "was a fiction," she interrupts gently. "Created by a publicist when Le Ciel began to gain recognition. People wanted to believe a restaurant this exceptional. It must have aristocratic origins." Her smile turns ironic. "The truth was less marketable." Vincent sits back, struggling to process this revelation. "Then how did you succeed?" Madame Laurent finishes for him. She slides another photo across the desk. In this one, a slightly older Claudette stands beside a distinguished older man in a chef's whites. Henri Beaumont. He owned La Maison, once the finest restaurant in the city. Recognition flickers in Vincent's eyes. "The legendary chef. He was your mentor." "My savior," she corrects. "And do you know how we met?" Vincent shakes his head. "I was standing outside his restaurant one night, just like Emma was standing outside ours, staring through the window, dreaming of the food inside." Her eyes grow distant with memory. "I hadn't eaten in 2 days. Henri noticed me. Do you know what he did?" The parallel to the current situation hangs heavy in the air. "He invited you in," Vincent says quietly. "He did more than that. He fed me, then offered me a job washing dishes." She leans forward. Henri believed talent and passion could be found anywhere, not just in culinary schools or among the wealthy. "He taught me everything he knew, not because I could pay him, but because he recognized something in me worth nurturing." Outside the office, Le Ciel continues its evening service, unaware of the transformation occurring behind the closed door. "When Henri died, he left me enough money to start my own place. That's how Le Ciel was born, not from privilege but from kindness." She taps the photograph. "I created the fiction of aristocratic roots because I thought it was necessary for success." Vincent stares at the photographs, his worldview crumbling. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because somewhere along the way, the fiction became real to you, Vincent." Madame Laurent's voice holds no accusation, only sadness. "You began turning away the very people I was once among, people like Emma." The realization hits Vincent with physical force. For 20 years, he had been enforcing rules against his own employer's true values. "I thought I was protecting your vision," he says weakly. "You were protecting your own fear," she replies gently. "The fear that exclusivity is the only thing separating you from those outside the window." Vincent remembers Emma's words. Fear makes the wolf bigger than he is. A knock at the door interrupts them. Zoe enters hesitantly. "Excuse me, Madame Laurent, but Chef Isabella asked me to tell you that dinner is being served at Ms. Streep's table." "Thank." "Are you Zoe?" Madame Laurent rises. "Will you join us, Vincent?" Vincent stands, still processing everything he's learned. "May I have a moment?" Left alone, Vincent moves to the window overlooking the dining room. From this vantage point, he can see Meryl, Stanley, and Emma engaged in animated conversation. The girl's face is transformed by excitement as she shows more sketches. Nearby diners have begun to interact with her, examining her artwork with genuine interest. The barrier has been broken. Vincent thinks of his own journey, the young man from Lyon who arrived in America with dreams as big as his insecurities. Somewhere along the way, he had confused exclusivity with excellence, forgetting that true quality isn't about keeping people out, but inviting them in. When Vincent returns to the dining room, his step is lighter, his posture less rigid. He approaches Meryl's table carrying a bottle of wine personally selected from the cellar. With the chef's compliments, he says, and there's a new quality in his voice, humility. "Thank you, Vincent," Meryl responds, studying his face. "Would you care to join us?" Surprise flickers across Vincent's features. "I couldn't possibly—" "Please," Emma says unexpectedly. "I'd like to show you my other drawings." Vincent hesitates, then carefully sets down the wine and takes the offered seat. As Emma opens her sketchbook, he truly sees her work for the first time. Not just the technical skill, but the humanity captured in each line. "You see people," he says softly. "Really see them." "I try to," Emma responds. "Everyone has a story." "Indeed they do," Vincent agrees, catching Madame Laurent's approving smile from across the room. What happens next transforms not just this evening, but the future of Le Ciel itself. As Emma shares her grandmother's remarkable connection to the fashion world, doors begin to open that will change her life forever. Emma's sketchbook lies open on the white tablecloth, her talented hands turning pages with growing confidence. The initial awkwardness has melted away as Meryl, Stanley, and now Vincent lean in to study each drawing. Around them, Le Ciel continues its elegant dance of fine dining, but the atmosphere has subtly shifted, curiosity replacing judgment, interest. Overcoming exclusivity. "This one," Vincent says, pointing to a sketch of an elderly woman sitting by a window, her hands working a piece of fabric. The detail in her hands is extraordinary. Emma smiles shyly. "That's my grandmother. She taught me to draw." She touches the image gently. "She used to work with her hands all day, sewing." "She was a seamstress?" Meryl asks, studying the skilled rendering of the woman's fingers. "More than that," Emma says with quiet pride. "Before her arthritis got bad, she designed costumes for Broadway, sometimes for films." Stanley looks up sharply. "What's your grandmother's name?" "Eleanor Reeves," Emma answers, though she worked under her maiden name, Eleanor Walsh. Stanley and Meryl exchange a startled glance. "Eleanor Walsh," Meryl repeats. "The Eleanor Walsh who designed costumes for Silk and Thread in 1982. Emma's eyes widen. "You know her work?" "Know it." Meryl laughs softly. "I wore it. My first major film role. The dresses were magnificent." Vincent, watching this exchange, feels something shift inside him. The invisible lines he'd drawn between people for so long begin to blur. This girl, this outsider he'd tried to turn away, is connected to the very world he reveres. "My grandmother talks about that film all the time," Emma says, excitement coloring her voice. She has sketches of the costumes in her portfolio. She said the lead actress was the most patient, kind person she'd ever fitted. "Eleanor Walsh," Stanley muses. "Wasn't she nominated for an Academy Award for that work?" "She was," Meryl confirms. "The detail in those costumes was revolutionary." She turns to Emma. "You've inherited her eye for detail." A thought occurs to Vincent. "If I may," he says tentatively, "why isn't your grandmother still working in the industry with talent like that?" Emma's expression clouds. "Her arthritis got really bad about 5 years ago. Then my mom got sick and—" She trails off, the weight of recent losses evident in her young face. "Now we get by on her small pension. I try to sell sketches sometimes, but it's not much." Madame Laurent, who has joined their table, exchanges a meaningful look with Meryl. "Emma," Meryl says, gently, "would you mind if I saw your grandmother's portfolio sometime? I'm always looking for talented costume designers for my projects." Emma stares in disbelief. "You want to see her work, but she hasn't designed anything new in years." "Talent doesn't expire," Stanley interjects, "and connections in this industry are everything." Vincent, watching Emma's face transform with hope, feels a strange sensation in his chest, the unfamiliar warmth of witnessing barriers fall. He thinks of Madame Laurent's story, of how one person's kindness changed the trajectory of her life. Now he's watching it happen again. "I have a confession," Vincent says suddenly. All eyes turn to him in surprise. "I've been sketching for years myself." "Nothing as good as yours," he adds quickly, nodding to Emma. "Just simple studies of the restaurant, the patrons." "You draw?" Emma asks, genuinely curious. Vincent nods, a flush creeping up his neck. "I wanted to be an artist once before I decided. It wasn't practical." "Perhaps you gave up too easily," Madame Laurent suggests gently. An elegant older woman approaches their table from across the restaurant. "Excuse me," she says, her gaze fixed on Emma's sketchbook. "I couldn't help noticing your work from my table. The composition is quite remarkable." Emma blushes. "Thank you. Diana Campbell," the woman introduces herself, offering a business card. "I run the Campbell Gallery in Soho. We have a young artist showcase next month. I'd be very interested in seeing more of your work." As Emma accepts the card with trembling fingers, Vincent catches Madame Laurent's eye. There's no surprise in her expression, only satisfaction. "You arranged this," he realizes, speaking low enough that only she can hear. "I made a phone call," Madame Laurent admits. "Diana is an old friend and a patron of emerging artists, but the opportunity is genuine. She wouldn't offer if she didn't see real talent." Across the table, Meryl is engaging Diana in conversation about Emma's potential, while Stanley asks Emma detailed questions about her grandmother's career. The girl's face is alight with a joy that makes her earlier hunger seem even more poignant. By contrast, a server approaches with dessert, exquisite chocolate soufflés that Chef Isabella has prepared specially. As the delicate dishes are placed before them, Vincent notices something unusual. Isabella has added an artistic touch to Emma's dessert, creating a miniature palette of colorful fruit sauces alongside it. "For the artist," Isabella explains with a wink. As conversation flows around the table, Vincent finds himself drawn into Emma's world. She describes her dream of art school, her voice gaining confidence with each encouraging nod from her newfound supporters. "I keep a portfolio of what I think are my best pieces," she explains. "My art teacher says I should apply for scholarships, but the competition is so intense." "Competition shouldn't deter you," Vincent finds himself saying. "True excellence always finds its audience." The words surprise him as much as everyone else. Just hours ago, he had been the gatekeeper, determined to keep this very girl outside. Now he's encouraging her dreams. Meryl gives him an appraising look. "That's very true, Vincent." As dessert concludes, Stanley pulls out his phone. "If you don't mind, I'd like to call your grandmother. There's a costume designer I know who's looking for an experienced consultant on a period piece." Emma's eyes fill with tears. "Really? That would mean everything to her." "Sometimes," Madame Laurent says, "the right connections can change lives, just as Henri changed mine." She squeezes Vincent's arm gently. "And as you all are changing Emma's." As Stanley steps away to make the call, Vincent watches the ripple effects of kindness spreading through the restaurant. Other diners who had witnessed the earlier confrontation now stop by the table to view Emma's artwork. Some leave business cards, others words of encouragement. What began as an act of exclusion has transformed into an evening of connection, proof that sometimes the very people we try to keep out are the ones who enrich our world the most. 1. Month later, Vincent stands at Luciel's entrance, surveying the transformed dining room with a mixture of pride and disbelief. White tablecloths remain, crystal still glimmers under the chandeliers, but something fundamental has changed. Tonight marks the inaugural Arts at Le Ciel evening, his idea, surprisingly enough. The restaurant hums with an energy Vincent has never felt before. In addition to the usual wealthy patrons, tables have been reserved for local art students, emerging designers, and community arts teachers. Along one wall, a small exhibition space displays artwork. Emma's sketches featured prominently among pieces from other undiscovered talents. "Nervous?" Madame Laurent asks, appearing beside him in an elegant black dress. "Terrified," Vincent admits with a small smile, but in a good way. In the week since Meryl Streep's visit, Vincent has undergone a transformation more profound than anyone could have predicted. The rigid gatekeeper has become an unexpected champion for opening Luciel's doors wider. The change wasn't instantaneous, old habits die hard, but it was genuine. "Your idea is brilliant," Madame Laurent assures him. "Henri would have loved it." Vincent adjusts his immaculate tie. "I just hope Miss Streep approves. After all, she inspired it." "She's already texted me that she's on her way," Madame Laurent reveals. "With some special guests." Before Vincent can inquire further, the door opens. Emma enters with her grandmother Eleanor, a dignified woman in her 70s whose elegant bearing remains despite the cane she leans on. Following Vincent's suggestion, Emma wears a vintage dress that her grandmother restored, a simple design that nonetheless carries the unmistakable touch of Eleanor Walsh's craftsmanship. "Vincent," Emma calls, her earlier shyness replaced by comfortable familiarity. "You have to see Grandma's portfolio. I brought it like you asked." Vincent greets them warmly, noting the transformation in Emma herself. The timid girl who had stood outside the window has blossomed into a confident young artist. The Campbell Gallery exhibition of her work last week had been a modest success, resulting in her first sales and a small scholarship offer. "Ms. Walsh," Vincent says, bowing slightly to Eleanor, "it's an honor to finally meet you. Your reputation precedes you." Eleanor studies him with sharp eyes. "Emma tells me you were quite the formidable gatekeeper when she first arrived." Vincent flushes. "I was. I've been learning some difficult lessons about the gates I've created in my life." Eleanor's expression softens. "The ability to change one's mind is rare these days. I find it admirable." Chef Isabella emerges from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. In the past month, she and Vincent have formed an unexpected alliance. Collaborating on this evening's concept, "Everything is ready," she announces. "The special menu cards look beautiful." Vincent nods appreciatively. Each dish tonight has been inspired by a different artwork on display, with descriptions that honor both the culinary creation and its artistic inspiration. It had been Vincent's idea, a bridge between the worlds of fine dining and creative expression. "And the tables for the students?" Vincent asks. "Set perfectly," Isabella confirms, "just as you specified." At Vincent's insistence, the tables reserved for art students and community members receive the same impeccable service as those occupied by wealthy patrons. No distinction, no separation. Excellence without exclusivity. The front door opens again, and the restaurant falls momentarily silent as Meryl Streep enters with Stanley Tucci and an elegant older woman Vincent doesn't recognize. "Judith!" Eleanor exclaims, her composed demeanor cracking with surprise. "Eleanor Walsh, as I live and breathe," the woman responds, moving forward to embrace Emma's grandmother. "It's been far too long." Vincent looks questioningly at Meryl, who explains in a low voice, "Judith Forrester, costume director for Paramount. She and Eleanor worked together in the 80s. When Stanley mentioned Eleanor's situation, Judith was eager to reconnect." As the two older women fall into animated conversation about fabrics and period authenticity, Emma approaches Vincent. "Thank you," she says simply. Vincent shakes his head. "I did very little. It was Miss Streep who—" "You changed," Emma interrupts. "That's not a little thing." The observation, delivered with the straightforward insight of youth, leaves Vincent momentarily speechless. Before he can respond, Zoe approaches with a message from the kitchen. "They're ready for the announcement," she tells Vincent. Taking a deep breath, Vincent steps to the center of the restaurant and gently taps a spoon against a crystal glass. The room quiets. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first Arts at Lucille evening." His voice, once used to enforce exclusivity, now rings with genuine warmth. "Tonight, we celebrate the connection between culinary arts and visual expression, between established talents and emerging voices." Vincent gestures to the displayed artwork. "Each piece you see represents not just artistic skill, but the courage to create despite obstacles. To honor that spirit, I'm pleased to announce that Lucille will establish a monthly showcase for emerging artists, with proceeds from these evenings supporting arts education in our community." Applause ripples through the room. Vincent catches Meryl's approving nod from where she stands with Eleanor and Judith. "Additionally," Vincent continues, We will be instituting a new apprenticeship program in our kitchen, open to talented individuals. Regardless of background or formal training, Chef Isabella raises her glass in affirmation, her staff beaming behind her. Several of them had come from disadvantaged backgrounds themselves, their potential recognized by Isabella's discerning eye rather than their credentials. Excellence, Vincent concludes, is not about exclusivity. It's about recognizing that brilliance can emerge from unexpected places. Thank you for joining us as we embrace this new vision. As dinner service begins, Vincent moves through the restaurant with a lightness in his step that hadn't been there before. He notices how naturally the different worlds are blending. Art students engaging with business executives, Eleanor deep in conversation with Judith about a potential consulting position, Emma showing her sketchbook to an intrigued fashion editor. Later, as dessert is being served, Meryl approaches Vincent at his observation post near the kitchen. Quite a transformation, she observes. Both the restaurant and the man running it. Vincent inclines his head in acknowledgement. I've been thinking about what you said that night, about fear being at the root of exclusivity. He pauses, finding the right words. You were right. I was afraid that without rigid boundaries, excellence would be compromised. I never considered that those boundaries might be keeping excellence out. Meryl smiles. The most beautiful transformations often begin with the most difficult realizations. As the evening winds to a close, Vincent notices Emma standing near the window where he had first seen her. Only now she's inside, looking out. The symbolism isn't lost on him. A penny for your thoughts? He asks, joining her. Emma turns, her face thoughtful. I was just thinking about how one moment can change everything. If Miss Streep hadn't seen me that night, what began as a confrontation between a waiter and a Hollywood icon has blossomed into something neither could have predicted, a transformation that extends far beyond a single evening at an exclusive restaurant. 3 months after that fateful evening, Le Ciel's private dining room buzzes with creative energy. The space, once reserved exclusively for wealthy patrons hosting intimate gatherings, has been temporarily transformed into a design studio. Sketches cover the walls, fabric swatches drape over chairs, and in the center of it all sits Eleanor Walsh, directing the activity with the quiet authority of someone who has found her purpose again. The neckline needs to be higher for the period. She instructs a young assistant, her arthritic hands gesturing precisely. Remember, this is 1890s Paris, not 1920s New York. Emma moves between tables, organizing sketches and taking notes. At 16, she has blossomed in ways no one could have predicted. Her school granted her special permission to participate in what they've recognized as an exceptional educational opportunity, working alongside her grandmother on costumes for Meryl Streep's new historical drama. The door opens, and Vincent enters carrying a tray of refreshments. His role at Le Ciel has evolved in unexpected ways. While still overseeing the dining room with his characteristic attention to detail, he now also serves as liaison for the restaurant's growing community initiatives, including this costume project. Tea for the artists, he announces, setting down the tray. Chef Isabella sent these pastries as well. She says creative work requires proper fuel. Eleanor looks up with a grateful smile. Vincent, perfect timing. We need a man's opinion on this waistcoat design. Vincent approaches, studying the sketch with genuine interest. In recent months, he's rediscovered his own eye for aesthetics, sometimes offering suggestions that surprise even himself. The lapel width seems historically accurate, he observes, but perhaps slightly more texture in the fabric would capture the light better on camera. Eleanor nods approvingly. My thoughts exactly. The private dining room door opens again and Meryl enters with Judith Forrester. Their arrival energizes the room immediately. Eleanor, these preliminary sketches are extraordinary, Meryl says, examining the designs pinned to a board. The production designer is thrilled with how you've captured the period details, while allowing for the movement the role requires. Judith nods in agreement. Honestly, Eleanor, it's like you never left the industry. Your eye is as sharp as ever. Eleanor's cheeks color slightly at the praise. Having proper resources makes all the difference. She gestures around the makeshift studio Madame Laurent has provided free of charge, and having Emma's help, of course. From his position near the refreshment table, Vincent observes the interaction with quiet satisfaction. He recalls Emma's grandmother's initial reluctance to accept this opportunity, pride and insecurity nearly preventing her from returning to her craft. It had taken a surprising alliance between himself and Emma to convince Eleanor that her talent was still valuable. "Vincent," Meryl calls, waving him over. "I've been meaning to ask, how are preparations coming for the fundraiser?" Vincent straightens, professional pride evident in his posture. "Everything is on schedule. We've confirmed 40 attendees from the film industry, 30 from the art world, and several major donors. Chef Isabella has designed a menu that incorporates elements from the historical period of your film." "And the scholarship announcement?" Meryl asks. "Prepared exactly as you requested," Vincent confirms. "We'll unveil it during dessert." The fundraiser they're discussing represents the culmination of the changes at Le Ciel, a gala event to establish the Streep Arts Initiative, providing scholarships and mentorships to young artists from underprivileged backgrounds. Emma will be announced as the first recipient, though she doesn't know it yet. Madame Laurent enters the room, her elegant presence commanding immediate attention. "I hope I'm not interrupting the creative process," she says. "I wanted to check if you need anything additional for the workspace." "It's perfect, Claudette," Eleanor assures her. "More than generous." The two women have formed an unexpected friendship, bonded by their shared understanding of how opportunity can transform lives. Eleanor's arthritis means she can no longer execute the fine sewing herself, but her design skills and direction have proven invaluable to the production. "Vincent," Madame Laurent says, "would you show Meryl and Judith the main dining room setup for the fundraiser? I've implemented some of your suggestions for the layout." As Vincent leads them out, Emma approaches her grandmother with a fresh design board. "I finished the color studies for the third act costumes," she says, displaying a series of watercolor renderings that show remarkable skill. Eleanor studies them with a critical eye before breaking into a smile. "These are professional quality. Emma, you've incorporated all the feedback perfectly." Emma beams under the praise. 3 months of intensive work alongside her grandmother and Judith has accelerated her artistic development exponentially. The scholarship she doesn't yet know about will allow her to attend a prestigious summer program at Parsons School of Design, a crucial stepping stone toward her future. In the main dining room, Vincent shows Meryl and Judith the transformed space. Tables have been arranged to facilitate conversation between different industry professionals, with displayed artwork from community programs creating natural focal points for discussion. "We've seated influential directors next to emerging artists," Vincent explains, "and studio executives beside community arts teachers. The goal is meaningful connection, not just fundraising." Meryl nods approvingly. "You've become quite the arts advocate, Vincent." He smiles slightly, acknowledging the unexpected turn his life has taken. "I've discovered that maintaining standards doesn't have to mean maintaining barriers. The most meaningful transformations often come from unlikely sources," Judith observes. "Eleanor tells me you've been taking drawing classes yourself." Vincent's expression turns sheepish. "Just basic figure studies, nothing remarkable." "Yet," Meryl amends with a knowing smile. Later that evening, after the design team has departed, Vincent oversees the regular dinner service with his characteristic precision. But regular diners at Le Ciel have noticed subtle changes in his demeanor, a warmth that wasn't there before, a genuine interest in people beyond their status or wealth. As he passes the window where he once spotted Emma standing outside, Vincent pauses. The restaurant's reflection shimmers against the night, but instead of creating a barrier between inside and out, the glass now seems more like a frame, highlighting the connection between the restaurant and the city beyond. Zoe approaches with a guest's question, and Vincent returns to his duties. Tomorrow brings the fundraiser, and with it a public declaration of Le Ciel's transformed vision. What began as Meryl Streep's simple act of kindness has catalyzed changes beyond anyone's imagination. The project that started as costume designs for a film has blossomed into something far more significant, a reimagining of what excellence truly means, not just in restaurants or art, but in how we value each other's humanity. 6 months after Meryl Streep first noticed a young girl standing outside Le Ciel's window, the restaurant has become almost unrecognizable, not in its physical appearance, which remains as elegant as ever, but in its spirit. Tonight, the dining room glows with excitement as New York's culinary reporter from The Times concludes her interview with Vincent and Madame Laurent. So essentially, the reporter says, reviewing her notes, you've maintained your Michelin stars, while implementing community programs that have actually increased your revenue by 22%, Madame Laurent confirms with quiet pride. It turns out excellence and inclusivity aren't mutually exclusive after all. Vincent, seated beside her in the now empty restaurant, adds, our regular clientele still enjoys the same quality dining experience, but now they're also part of something more meaningful. The reporter gestures toward the wall where photographs display Le Ciel's various initiatives, the Arts at Le Ciel evenings, the apprenticeship program, and most recently, the community table program, where 2 tables are reserved each night for guests who could never afford to dine there otherwise. And you personally oversee the community table program, she asks Vincent. I consider it a privilege, he answers, the sincerity in his voice unmistakable. Some of our most memorable guests have come through that program. After the reporter leaves, Vincent and Madame Laurent linger over a glass of wine, reviewing reservation lists for the following week. The Moretti reservation requested Emma as their server again, Vincent notes. Her charm has made quite an impression. Emma's part-time position at Le Ciel had begun as a simple way to earn money while attending the Parsons Weekend program. But her natural warmth and the unique perspective she brings to the dining experience have made her unexpectedly popular with regular patrons. And Chef Isabella wants to promote Zoe to sous chef, Madame Laurent adds. She's shown remarkable talent. Vincent smiles, remembering how Zoe had been the first staff member to ally with Meryl and Emma that pivotal night. Sometimes the people we overlook turn out to be our greatest assets. The restaurant's phone rings. Vincent answers, his expression shifting from professional politeness to surprise. Yes, she's here regularly. An invitation to what? He listens intently. I'll make sure she receives it. Thank you. Hanging up, he turns to Madame Laurent with an incredulous expression. That was the White House. They're hosting an arts education initiative next month and would like Emma to attend. Apparently, Meryl recommended her as an exemplary success story. Madame Laurent raises an eyebrow. From standing outside our window to the White House in 6 months, the ripple effects continue to surprise us. The following afternoon, Emma arrives for her shift, hair pulled back neatly, her Parsons portfolio tucked under her arm. At 17, she carries herself with a confidence that makes her seem older, though glimpses of youthful enthusiasm still break through her professional demeanor. Vincent, she calls, hurrying toward him. You won't believe what happened at school today. Her excitement is contagious as she explains how her costume design project received recognition from a visiting Broadway designer. He asked if I'd consider interning with his team next summer, she finishes breathlessly. That's wonderful, Vincent responds warmly, though not surprising given your talent. He hesitates before adding, I have some news for you as well. Rather significant news, actually. As he tells her about the White House invitation, Emma's expression transforms from disbelief to overwhelmed joy. But why me? She whispers. I haven't done anything special. On the contrary, comes Madame Laurent's voice as she joins them. You've shown what's possible when opportunity meets talent. Emma shakes her head, still processing. None of this would have happened if Meryl Streep hadn't seen me that night, and if a young waiter hadn't opposed her, Vincent adds with self-deprecating humor. Life's most meaningful changes often begin with conflict, Madame Laurent observes. Speaking of which, your grandmother called. The costume fittings for Meryl's film begin next week in the studio they've set up for her. The studio, funded through the Streep Laurent initiative, allows Eleanor to work without the physical strain of traveling to set. Her arthritis remains challenging, but having purposeful work has improved her spirits immeasurably. As Emma begins her shift, Vincent returns to his office to find a visitor waiting. Stanley Tucci, who has become a regular presence at Le Ciel since that fateful night. "I've just come from a fascinating meeting," Stanley announces without preamble. "Several other restaurants have approached me about implementing programs similar to your community table initiative." Vincent's eyebrows rise. "Really? Which ones?" Stanley names 3 of Manhattan's most exclusive establishments, former competitors, who once shared Vincent's rigid approach to exclusivity. "Apparently, word has spread about how your reputation has actually been enhanced by becoming more inclusive," Stanley explains. "They're interested in the model." Vincent shakes his head in amazement. "If you had told me 6 months ago that our competitors would be asking to emulate our community programs—" "The ripple effect," Stanley says simply. "One act of kindness, properly placed, can transform an entire industry." Later that evening, during the busy dinner service, Vincent notices a familiar face at the bar, Keanu Reeves, whose quiet philanthropy is well known within Hollywood circles. The actor observes the restaurant thoughtfully, particularly the community table, where an elderly music teacher and his wife are being treated with the same impeccable service as the wealthy patrons nearby. When Keanu catches Vincent's eye, he gives a small nod of approval. After his meal, he approaches Vincent privately. "I've heard about what you're doing here," he says in his distinctive, gentle voice. "I have a similar program I support in Los Angeles. Perhaps we could discuss expanding both initiatives?" By the time the restaurant closes, Vincent has tentative plans for a bi-coastal collaboration that would bring the Le Ciel model to restaurants in Los Angeles, with Keanu's foundation providing additional funding. As the last staff members leave, Vincent stands alone in the quiet dining room. He thinks about the young man he was 6 months ago, rigid, fearful, and desperately protecting artificial boundaries. The transformation hasn't always been easy. Some longtime patrons resisted the changes, and Vincent himself sometimes struggles with old habits of judgment. But the evidence is undeniable. Le Ciel is more successful than ever, not despite opening its doors wider, but because of it. Excellence hasn't been compromised, it's been redefined. At the window where he once tried to block Emma from view, Vincent now sees his own reflection, still impeccably dressed, still detail-oriented, but with an openness in his expression that wasn't there before. Beyond his reflection, the city lights shimmer. Somewhere out there, other Emmas are waiting for their opportunity. Thanks to the ripple effects of one confrontation turned connection, more doors are opening every day. What began with Meryl Streep noticing a girl through a window has transformed not just Le Ciel, but the very landscape of opportunity in New York's elite restaurant world. And now, with new collaborations on the horizon, those ripples are about to become waves. 1 year to the day since Meryl Streep first noticed Emma sketching outside Le Ciel, the restaurant glows with celebration. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic patterns across walls, now adorned with carefully selected artwork. Some pieces from established artists, others from students in the outreach programs that have become Le Ciel's hallmark. Tonight marks the anniversary. Gala for the Streep Laurent initiative and New York's elite have turned out in force. But unlike galas of the past, these wealthy patrons mingle comfortably with artists, educators, and community members who would once have been kept firmly outside. Vincent moves through the crowd with practiced grace, his attention to detail unchanged, but his perspective transformed. He pauses near the entrance, straightening a slightly askew place setting, when he notices a young man standing outside, peering through the window with the same uncertainty Emma had shown a year ago. Without hesitation, Vincent steps outside. "Would you like to come in?" he asks. "We're celebrating the arts tonight." The young man startles. "I can't afford—" "You're our guest," Vincent interrupts gently, opening the door with a welcoming gesture. Inside, Emma greets arriving celebrities with the poise of someone far beyond her 18 years. Her portfolio recently earned her a scholarship to a prestigious design program, and her work with her grandmother on Meryl's film has opened doors that once seemed permanently closed. Eleanor watches her granddaughter with quiet pride from her seat at a place of honor. Her health has improved with regular treatment she can now afford, and though her hands remain gnarled from arthritis, her designs have regained their place of respect in the industry. Beside her sits Madame Laurent, the two women chatting like old friends. "They're ready for the presentation," Zoe informs Vincent as he returns with the young visitor. Now Le Ciel's sous chef, Zoe has blossomed under Chef Isabella's mentorship, her culinary talent matched by her commitment to training other young people from disadvantaged backgrounds. The room quiets as Meryl Streep takes the center of the floor, elegant in a gown that Eleanor designed specifically for this occasion. "1 year ago," Meryl begins, "a moment of conflict in this very restaurant sparked a transformation none of us could have predicted." She gestures around the room. What began as a simple request to feed a hungry young artist has evolved into programs that have changed hundreds of lives. Screens around the room display images from the past year. Emma at her first gallery showing, Eleanor in her studio surrounded by costume designs, apprentice chefs learning under Isabella's guidance, community table guests experiencing fine dining for the first time, Vincent teaching an art appreciation class for local students. "Tonight," Meryl continues, "we celebrate not just what we've accomplished, but what happens when we question the barriers we create between each other." She raises her glass. "To seeing each other, truly seeing each other, across all the windows that separate us." The toast echoes through the room as Stanley Tucci joins Meryl at the center. "We have a special announcement to make," he says. "Thanks to unprecedented support, the Streep Laurent initiative will be expanding nationally to 20 cities in the coming year." Applause fills the room, but the most significant moment comes when Emma steps forward, carrying a large covered canvas. "I've been working on this piece for months," she says, her voice steady despite her nerves, "to commemorate where this all began." As she unveils the painting, a hush falls over the gathering. The canvas depicts Le Ciel on that first night. But, unlike Emma's earlier sketches that showed people separated by glass, this work portrays the window as a threshold being crossed. Meryl stands at the center, hand extended toward a younger Emma, while Vincent's figure appears caught between pushing away and welcoming in. The technical skill is impressive, but it's the emotional truth of the moment that renders the audience silent. "I've titled it The Invitation," Emma explains, "because that's what changes everything, being invited in when you've been kept outside." Vincent stares at his own image, captured with remarkable insight, the conflict, the fear, the beginning. Of change all visible in his painted expression. Tears sting unexpectedly at his eyes. Madame Laurent rises to accept the painting on behalf of Le Ciel. "This will hang permanently in our entrance," she announces, "to remind us daily of our commitment to true hospitality." As the evening progresses, Vincent finds himself beside Meryl at a quiet moment. "Did you know?" he asks. "That night, did you know how much would change?" Meryl smiles thoughtfully. "I just knew a hungry girl deserved dinner. The rest," she gestures around the transformed restaurant. "This was created by all of us, including you, Vincent. Especially you." "Me?" Vincent questions, surprised. "Change is hardest for those who have the most to unlearn," Meryl explains. "Your transformation gave others permission to examine their own assumptions." Across the room, Vincent notices the young man he invited in earlier, now deep in conversation with a film producer about his interest in cinematography. Another door opening. The legacy of that night continues to grow in ways none of them could have anticipated. Le Ciel remains exclusive in its culinary excellence, but inclusive in its welcome. The restaurant industry across New York has begun to follow suit, discovering that prestige and compassion can coexist beautifully. Eleanor's designs for Meryl's film recently earned an Oscar nomination, bringing her career full circle. Emma's work continues to evolve, her unique perspective informed by having stood on both sides of the window. And Vincent, perhaps the most profoundly changed, has found his voice as an advocate for breaking down barriers in unexpected places. As the celebration continues around him, Vincent moves to the window where it all began. The glass still separates inside from outside, but now it serves a different purpose, not as a barrier to keep people out, but as a clear invitation to come in. On the sidewalk, a young woman pauses, sketchbook in hand, studying the gathering. Inside. For a moment, she reminds Vincent of Emma a year ago. Their eyes meet across the glass, and Vincent smiles, gesturing welcomingly. Without hesitation, she steps toward the door, which opens before she can even reach for it. The threshold crossed once again. One moment of kindness, one challenge to the status quo, one decision to see humanity where others saw inconvenience. The legacy continues, rippling outward in ever-widening circles of opportunity and connection. If you've been touched by this story of transformation and second chances, please like and subscribe to our channel. Remember that kindness costs nothing but changes everything. The barriers we create can be dismantled by simple acts of humanity, and excellence is never diminished by being shared more widely.